Christ formed in you for the sake of others. Welcome to the Wild Way Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to week 19, A Slow Journey Through John. This is our Explore episode. My name's Nick. I'm here with Jamie.
Hey.
And we're excited to jump into John chapter 7 today. And one of the best things about every time we start a new chapter is we get a new narrator.
And so this week, you have the privilege of hearing from our friend Krista.
Like I mentioned, this past week, we were in John chapter 7. And we started John chapter 7 the week before, although we didn't talk about it in our Explore episode. And this past week, we went through verses 6 to 36. But today, we're just going to cover verses 1 to 30. And this is a fascinating story, beginning with Jesus's brothers urging him to go to the Feast of Tabernacles to prove himself, Jesus saying no. And then after his brothers leave, Jesus, dresses up in disguise and goes secretly into Jerusalem. And so people are talking about him. And then halfway through, I picture him in this dramatic moment of ripping off this disguise or throwing back his cloak like Gandalf did in Lord of the Rings. And he begins... Yes, exactly. He begins teaching. So he starts to teach, and then the crowds, of course, start to debate, and they harass him. And Jesus once again expresses his unity with the Father. He defends himself again. And in our section today that we're looking at ends with this ominous reminder. So they wanted to seize Jesus, but they couldn't because his time had not yet come. So, lots going on in the scriptures. What stood out to you, Jamie, from the week of meditations?
Well, Nick, honestly, I found that in almost every weekday meditation, there were so many zingers. I can tell you were feeling really spicy when you were writing this. And I guess what stood out to me is that last week we heard that tons of disciples left him because of his difficult teaching. And now here we can see the actual hatred of Jesus growing. It's hard. This is hard. It gets harder and harder to watch. It gets more and more heavy from this point forward.
Yeah, for me, I also see this growing tension happening, and just the whole drama of the story stood out to me. So Jesus, he's at this point in ministry where he's facing a lot of criticism and opposition. And like you said, his disciples have deserted him. The religious leaders in Judea want to kill him. And it made me think this week how difficult it must have been for him, even when we know what we're doing is the right thing to do, and we're confident that it's the right thing to do. Facing opposition is really hard. And so I actually felt sad for Jesus this week, just because of everything he's facing from people.
Yeah, and he's the only one experiencing it. He's the only one getting the hate. He's very alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we just jump into the teaching right now, and maybe, Jamie, you can read verses 1 to 13.
After this, Jesus traveled throughout Galilee. He didn't want to travel in Judea because the Jewish authorities wanted to kill him. When it was almost time for the Jewish festival of booths, Jesus' brothers said to him, "Leave Galilee. Go to Judea so that your disciples can see the amazing works that you do. Those who want to be known publicly don't do things secretly. Since you can do these things, show yourself to the world." His brothers said this because even they didn't believe in him. Jesus replied, "For you, any time is fine, but my time hasn't come yet. The world can't hate you. It hates me, though, because I testify that its works are evil. You go up to the festival. I'm not going to this one because my time hasn't come." Having said this, he stayed in Galilee. However, after his brothers left for the festival, he went too, not openly, but in secret. The Jewish leaders were looking for Jesus at the festival. They kept asking, "Where is he?" The crowds were murmuring about him. "He's a good man," some said, but others were saying, "No, he tricks the people." No one spoke about him publicly, though, for fear of the Jewish authorities.
Okay, yeah. Tons of stuff going on. What catches your attention there, Jamie?
One thing caught my attention. I've never noticed it before, but I just thought it was very weird that Jesus told his brothers that he wasn't going to the festival, and then he did. And did he lie? Did he just change his mind? That's an interesting question. And also, like you, I keep thinking, like, how did Jesus get there in secret? So he had to travel quite a distance on foot in secret all the way to get to Jerusalem and blend in the midst of this huge crowd. And so does that mean he snuck? There's all these underground tunnels in Jerusalem. Did he like sneak through the tunnels and then just pop up so nobody could see him? Or did he, like you said, disguise himself like a celebrity avoiding the paparazzi? And I really wish, I told you earlier, I really wish I could have been there just to see how he disguised himself.
Yeah, especially if he is showing up in those Groucho Marx glasses and mustache and nose and stuff.
Yeah. I just wish I could travel in time to sit in the crowd and see if I could see his disguise. I'm just so curious about his disguise.
Yeah.
Anyway, not at all important to anything, but carry on.
Let's first talk about the Feast of Tabernacles itself, because this feast is going to be the setting for the next few chapters, all the way here from chapter 7 up to the middle of chapter 10. And it's known today as Sukkot, and people still who celebrate Sukkot, they will sometimes camp outside their homes in tents during this week. And it was a really joyful celebration because it commemorated Israel's 40 years of wandering in the wilderness and living in tents. And that's what Sukkot means. It means tabernacle or booth. But it was also a celebration of the harvest, and it was an expression of the Jews' messianic hope.
And I find it ironic because A, their messianic hope is right there, although in disguise, and B, this is the Feast of Tabernacles, and where God tabernacled with them, and the new way that God's going to tabernacle with them is right there. You're right, this is a Feast of Tabernacles. He's right, your tabernacle is right there.
Yeah, and they don't recognize that.
Yep.
And I mentioned in the meditations, just almost in passing, that in the Mosaic Law, there were 7 feasts, the Feast of Tabernacles being one of them, and there was one fast. There's only one fast that was mandated.
That's so interesting because I would have, if I, like thinking about it, I would have flipped that probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there were more fasts that were added throughout time, but in the actual Torah, it was only one in preparation for the Day of Atonement. And it just made me think about, so we have this ratio of one fast to 7 feasts. And when I think about the spiritual disciplines today and Christians practicing spiritual disciplines, we often talk about the discipline of fasting, but actually there is a spiritual discipline of feasting.
Yeah, but if you look at it in terms of the Jewish festivals of feasts, I would not say it's like just going out and having a great meal, partying and whatnot. Like to me, what these feasts were about were always just like thanking God and speaking out what God had done and how He'd been faithful to them. And so today, I think if we are to actually practice that discipline of feasting, it would be something to remember what God has done in our own lives and how He's brought us out of different things. Like it's a thing of worship.
Yeah,
Not just having a great meal.
I agree. There's definitely this idea of remembrance and gratitude attached to these feasts. If we were going to practice it today, it wouldn't be like, hey, let's just have a big family meal and invite friends over, although that would be an important part of it. But maybe as part of that, having this time of even just commemorating God's loving action in our life in the previous year, like at Thanksgiving or something. It could be, we can have a Thanksgiving meal and it's not a spiritual discipline of feasting, but if you actually add in thanksgiving to God and remembrance of his goodness, then that is the spiritual discipline of feasting.
Yeah, and I also just think that humans are just not good at doing this. Like I don't think humans are good at speaking it out and remembering what God has done.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing that's just important for our discussion over the next couple of weeks regarding the Feast of Tabernacles is that there were 2 ceremonies. Well, there's more, but there were 2 specific ceremonies that happened during the feast. And so one, every day the priests would gather water from the Pool of Siloam and march it into the temple and pour it out as an act of thanking God for his provision and expressing hope for his future provision. And so we're going to see that come into play next week when Jesus stands up and starts shouting, hey, if you're thirsty, come to me and drink.
Yeah.
But then there's also another celebration or another ceremony called the illumination of the temple, which is when 4 candlesticks with bowls at the top were lit in the court of women. And this light symbolized God's presence in the pillar of fire that was guiding the people throughout the wilderness wanderings. And this comes into play in chapter 8 when we see Jesus stand up and say, I am the light of the world. That's the setting of everything that's happening over the next few chapters. Let's just jump into this passage in particular, and let's talk about the brothers, because in these verses, we're reintroduced to Jesus's brothers. We met them first in chapter 2, and they make other appearances in the Gospels, most notably in Mark 3, when they think that Jesus has lost his mind and they go and try to speak to him. And that's when Jesus says, "Hey, my mother and brothers are those who do the will of God." So they're definitely not believers at this point. And it gives us some possible insight into their words to Jesus here. So when you hear them say these words, what tone do you imagine they're being spoken with?
When they say those kinds of things, it reminds me of Jesus being tempted in the wilderness when did we talk about this already with the brothers in this particular thing?
No, we talk.
Oh,
We're going to talk about it in a second, but we talked about it in relation to the crowd wanting to make him king.
yeah.
in
Well, I feel
chapter
like
6.
if it weren't for the very last line, it almost could be taken as encouraging. They're like, "Oh, right on, go do it." But it says the very last line is not even his brothers believed him. So yeah, I think they're being there's disingenuous or sarcastic or something. But I feel for them. Suddenly, their brother is publicly equating himself with God.
Yeah.
My sister started doing that, I'd be like, "You absolute psychopath," right?
Yeah. So maybe you can understand why they would think he was out of his mind in
Well,
Mark
for
chapter
sure.
3.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't quite understand why they're saying, "Go and do this," though. This little interaction doesn't quite make sense.
I agree with you. I think they're being disingenuous, sarcastic, maybe even mocking him a little bit. Like,
It's rude. It's not.
yeah, for sure. Other people do have different opinions about the motivation here, but I tend to agree with you. Now, for myself, not all of my family are followers of Jesus, but I've been lucky in a sense in that when I started following Jesus later in life and made the decision to become a pastor, all of my family was really supportive, even the ones that weren't followers of Jesus themselves. And so I can't imagine what Jesus must have had to go through with his very own family. But I do know that there are many people who can relate to that, even some people who get completely ostracized by their family if they decide to follow Jesus, which is an extremely high cost. And I'm very thankful that I didn't have to pay that. But those that do face ostracization from their family, they're really co-suffering with Christ because they're experiencing rejection like he experienced rejection, just like the prologue states, in a way that I can't understand personally.
I personally have lost loved ones because of my belief and my insistence in following Jesus. And it's been really tough. And I know that anybody else who has lost family members or loved ones because they follow Jesus, it's just such a huge cost. And so I do believe that moving forward, God will provide you with good people who fulfills those family roles to replace what you've lost.
Yeah, I agree. Jamie, you already commented on the kind of the worldly wisdom behind the advice that the brothers give Jesus. And it does make sense from a worldly perspective. Everything of note happens in Jerusalem. And in this culture, Judeans looked down on Galileans. And so, in one sense, his brothers are saying, listen, if you want to make a name for yourself, if you want to gain followers, you have got to impress Jerusalem. Stop doing all these miracles here in Galilee. Go there and impress the people there. And it makes me think of how the world defines success today. We define success as lots of recognition, lots of social media followers. It would be tough for a person who quietly follows Jesus, loves others well, but behind the scenes, it would be tough for them to think of themselves as successful, but they are. And I think that's one of the reasons why, if there were going to be some kind of awards in heaven, many winners would be people no one has ever heard of because they weren't recognized on earth, but they were faithful in listening to and obeying Jesus and bringing the kingdom of God to their little corner of the world in their quiet way.
Success, it's not wealth and academics, things like that. It is the ability to love and serve others and love and serve Jesus. I worked in a Christian school for so long. I worked amongst many people who have followed Jesus, but the ones that were truly successful where these EAs, there's a couple of EAs that stand out. Like they were very humble and quiet. They were always in the background, never taking the spotlight, but they were praying for me. They would always speak encouragement to me. They're praying for the students. They're always serving everybody. And I just think those were the most successful people in the kingdom of God that I've ever met.
Absolutely. It's not necessarily the person who's out front leading people.
Often it isn't.
Yes.
If we're going to find out one day that in the hierarchy of God, it's the person, it's the least who's the best. It's the smallest, it's the least, it's the servant.
Yeah, the one who quietly serves others and loves others. That's the one who God says, well done, good and faithful servant. And like you said, Jamie, this is the third time Jesus has faced this temptation, with the devil first and then with the crowds who want to make him king. Prove yourself, show your power, be spectacular, take hold of the political power that is within your grasp. And again, we talked about this, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, but just this temptation for power, especially political power, which has been the downfall, in my opinion, has been the downfall of the church for 1700 years, since the Edict of Milan in 313. That's the edict that gave Christianity, legalized Christianity within the Roman Empire, and gave the church permission to own property. And it led to this desire for and building of wealth and power within the church. And we've already talked about that, but I just want to bring it up again.
And I just think that anytime you link Christianity to the current empire, can't go well.
Yeah.
It completely washes Christianity of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good way of saying it. And we'll probably talk about this in a little bit, but the idea of empire, right? We had the Roman Empire and there was other empires, and there's empire today. And anytime the church connects itself to empire, it is not fulfilling its role as God's voice on earth.
And anytime the empire mandates that Christianity is followed, it's not followed in the way of Jesus.
Yes. Let's move on to this idea of Jesus changing his mind. When you look at this on the surface, what does it look like that's happening?
Yeah, as I said before, this makes me uncomfortable because I don't understand it. It looks like he said, I'm not going to go to the festival, guys, and then immediately goes to the festival. So we have to ask, was he lying? Did he change his mind? He couldn't have been lying, could he? This is uncomfortable.
Yeah, it does seem like he's telling them one thing and then doing another thing. But what helps us understand this, and I mentioned part of this in the meditations, there's actually 3 Greek words for time. We have one English word, time, but there's 3 Greek words. One which doesn't apply to anything we're talking about now. One is just the word chronos, and that means linear time. Normally, when Jesus speaks about my time has not yet come, the Greek word he uses is the word hora. He's referring to the time of his crucifixion. It means like the time of destiny. It's, for example, in verse 30, which we're going to look at soon, it says that Jesus is safe from the authorities seizing him because his time had not yet come. And that word is hora. His destined time for his crucifixion had not yet come. And so he was not going to be seized. But when Jesus is talking to his brothers, he uses the Greek word kairos, which means, among other things, the most opportune time or the best opportunity to accomplish something.
So are you saying then he says to his brothers, it's not the best opportunity right now?
Yeah.
But maybe in a bit it will be.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden, here's a good opportunity, so I'm going to go.
Yeah. So if you think about it, his brothers wanted him to come at the beginning of the festival publicly to do his thing. And he says, no, that is not the best opportunity for me to accomplish what I want to accomplish. And so he goes later in the middle of the festival privately, because that gives him the opportunity to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And so he's saying to his brothers, this isn't the right opportunity for me to go to the festival.
But if they see him later, they're not going to be like, you lied to us.
No.
So we might understand that, but that's not the truth of what was going on.
Yeah. Basically, his brothers wanted him to go publicly, and he wanted to go in secret. So going in secret was the opposite of what his brothers wanted. And then he says, when he's talking to his brothers about this, he says, the reason this isn't good is because the world hates me. It doesn't hate you, but it hates me. And just a couple of things here. First of all, the word world can have different meanings in John, even though it's the same Greek word. So when Jesus says the world hates me, he's not talking about the world as in the physical creation, like he does in John 3:16, where he says, "For God so loved the world." He's talking about the wicked systems of the world
So
hate him.
wicked systems of the world hate me, brothers, but the wicked systems of the world don't hate you. You're living in them.
Exactly
And I'm
right.
not.
Exactly right. So the last time Jesus was in Jerusalem, when he healed the man by the pool of Bethsaida in chapter 5, John notes that the Jewish authorities wanted to kill him. And then he notes it again at the beginning of chapter 7 that you just read, that Jesus is in Galilee and not in Judea because they want to kill him. And you have to ask, what could prompt such hatred? And Jesus tells us when he talks to his brothers, he says, "Because I testify that its works are evil." And no one likes to be told, "Hey, what you're doing is evil. What you're doing is wrong." And I think about these prophetic voices in history, like William Wilberforce or Martin Luther King Jr., who speak out against the broken and wicked systems of the world. And many people admire them, but the world itself, those broken systems itself, and the people who benefit from those broken systems, they hate those people. They do not admire them, which is what's going on here, which is why the religious leaders are hating Jesus. But in my opinion, again, this is the most important role of the church. We are called to be that prophetic voice that speaks out against unjust world systems. And there's this great book called The Prophetic Imagination by Walter Brueggemann that talks about this role of the prophet in society, especially in relation to power. And he says the church is here to critique the status quo and also to ignite the imagination of people to a better reality, a more joyful, just reality.
So he's not saying that the church should align and fully be dissolved into the status quo.
No, not, he's saying just the opposite. He's saying,
It's being sarcastic.
oh, okay. Yeah, all right. So he's saying as soon as that happens, the church has lost its voice. Like the church has lost its reason for being if it becomes the status quo or part of the status quo or aligns itself with these unjust systems. And the problem is, of course, is that yeah, if we are a part of that system, we can't stand on the outside and speak prophetically against it and call it to something to reimagine itself as something better because we're benefiting from it.
And in fact, anybody who does choose to do that is vilified.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's why Jesus says to his brothers, "Hey, the world doesn't hate you because you're not criticizing the world." And it's also why Jesus says in chapter 15, "If the world hates you, know that it hated me first. If you belonged to the world would love you. But I've chosen you out of the world, and you don't belong to the world anymore. This is why the world hates you." So as long as we are, and by the word world, again, he's talking about not the created order, but about these unjust, evil systems. As long as we are a part of these systems, the world's going to love us. But as soon as we remove ourselves from it or speak out against it, like I know it's hard we're surrounded by it. Like we're all, even if we don't want to, we're enmeshed within it. But as soon as we raise our voices to speak out against the system, the church receives hatred. We're called out of the world to have a prophetic voice to the world. And if we don't care enough about injustice to speak out, then we've lost our way. And so many times we choose to remain quiet. Sometimes it's out of fear, like you said, like the world can speak out and comes at a high cost. We can be ostracized, we can be kicked out of community because these systems, if the church begins to align itself with these systems, then sometimes that prophetic voice is actually speaking to the church. And if someone stands up in their church community and speaks in a way that's,
"You brood of vipers.
Yes.
You're oppressing the poor."
Yes.
They're not going to be super popular.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And like I said in the meditation, we are seeing various regimes in the world today where followers of Jesus hesitate to speak out be- against hatred, even hatred done in the name of God, for fear of what the backlash may be from those in power. So we have good people who are staying silent because they are afraid of losing their community if they question the actions of the community, and especially the community leaders.
You said that we're in a world today where followers of Jesus are hesitating to speak out against hatred, but I've seen recently that they're not only not speaking out against hatred, but they're also celebrating decisions that are very much not in alignment with the ideals of Jesus. And it looks like a Christianity at sometimes that no longer is following Jesus, but like a totally different religion that holds to some Christian principles, but still makes it look Christian. But underneath, if you look at it, it just looks like a religion that casts out the poor, the marginalized, the foreigner, pushes away the hurting and the broken. And if this is what your Christianity looks like, can it still bear the name of Christ if it looks nothing like how he lived or who he was or how he told us to live? What do you think?
That's a super valid question. And I would agree with you that if our community living looks very little a Jesus aligned his life, then we would be hard pressed. Well, I mean, we might call ourselves followers of Jesus. I just don't know if Jesus would call us followers of Jesus. And I think this is one of those things, these things where, he says, I think it's in Matthew 26, that there are going to be people who, when Jesus returns, and they're going to say, look at all these things we did in your name.
Lord.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he says, I didn't know you.
Yeah.
And
tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky, but it's also like, we do need these voices because we can get into groupthink and just go along with the flow of things. And we need those people who will say, wait a minute, this doesn't really look like what Jesus is saying. And it's hard to be that voice, and it's hard to listen to that voice as well.
Yeah, and this could be like as small as your home church to as big as the empire you're immersed in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see here and throughout the chapter, well, really throughout the book of John,
throughout history.
Yeah, but Jesus, his presence is very polarizing. And so here in chapter 7, we have people saying he's a good man, and we have others saying, yeah, let's kill him.
Some people are saying he's tricking everyone.
Yeah.
Like
he's a seducer. He's a deceiver. Yeah. So very, very polarizing. So many reactions to him. And that hasn't changed today. Like you said, he still polarizes today. But sadly, although followers of Jesus are willing to speak out against their pet issues, and often has to do with morality, for sure, not as many are willing to speak out against the system that is benefiting them so greatly, even though the system is wicked and unjust.
It's heartbreaking.
Yes, very heartbreaking. I think we should just leave that there, and we should move on now to so Jesus is now in Jerusalem, and we're at the halfway point of the festival when he rips off his disguise,
pops up out of the tunnel.
So maybe you can read verses 14 to 19.
Halfway through the festival, Jesus went up to the temple and started to teach. Astonished, the Jewish leaders asked, "He's never been taught. How has he mastered the law?" Jesus responded, "My teaching isn't mine, but comes from the one who sent me. Whoever wants to do God's will can tell whether my teaching is from God or whether I speak on my own. Those who speak on their own seek glory for themselves. Those who seek the glory of him who sent me are the people of truth. There's no falsehood in them. Didn't Moses give you the law? Yet none of you keep the law. Why do you want to kill me?"
All right. There are a couple of things I think would be good for us just to mention out of this little passage. One is just how focused people were on appearances. We're hearing this theme a lot. Who is this guy? How can he say these things? How can he do these things? It's one of the major questions in the book of John. Who is Jesus? But here the question is, this guy has no education. He's from the backwoods of Galilee. How can he teach like this? And what I find interesting is rather than focusing on the content of the teaching, they are focused on his education and his educational background. And later they're going to focus on other surface things like his appearance, his family background, his geographical origin, his social status. And This is a great example of how when we are hearing things we don't want to hear, we will use any excuse possible to dismiss it. So Jesus is saying something they don't want to hear, and they're saying basically, this guy doesn't have a seminary degree, so why should we listen to him? In many ways, we're similar today. We dismiss others who we feel are not qualified. Question for you, Jamie. Have you ever dismissed yourself because you didn't feel qualified to say or do something? Or have you ever felt dismissed by someone?
Nick, story of my life. As I think, just as a woman in general, number one, and two, just as someone who I haven't always felt safe to speak up or to have a voice in for many different reasons. So therefore, I've frequently dismissed myself, to be honest. And it's easier to be quiet, especially if I feel like other people are more articulate or more measured in their words than I am. Because as you know, I can just be like a firecracker and say things that are not right sometimes. I don't really say things well, so it keeps me to quiet. And so it was really difficult to even agree to speak out on this podcast. And that's one reason why I have so much admiration for the younger generation. They find their voices, they speak out constantly, they're constantly attacking the systems and speaking out against injustice on social media. So like our oldest daughter, for instance, she does that very well. And so do many of my former students. And it's awesome to watch. But as I am learning, I think it's just our absolute God-given duty that we must speak up against injustice or systems or people who oppress others or people who prevent anyone from living a flourishing life. I don't think that we should be expecting anybody else or waiting for somebody more articulate. I think it has to be like each one of us has to take up this role to speak out. You're fairly comfortable with speaking out. Would you say you're comfortable with calling out injustice? There's so much to lose often, right? Like when you're speaking out against injustice, there's a lot to lose.
In general, I don't love conflict, especially one-on-one conflict. But I I would have to say, when we think of the wicked systems, I'm sitting here as a straight, white, middle-aged man. And
So you're doing all right.
so I have the
Yeah.
benefit from this system. And we're talking about speaking up with prophetic imagination. And yes, but right now, there are a lot of the voices coming to us are from the ostracized and marginalized. And what we really need to
Yeah.
see is we need to see people with power or people who benefit the most, like straight white men,
Mhm.
speaking out and saying, this is wrong.
Yeah.
It is wrong if a person loses their voice in church because of their gender. It is wrong if a person loses their voice because of their socioeconomic status or because of the color of their skin.
Yeah.
It is wrong, and we as the church have to be the ones defending them. The people with power have to be the ones who are lifting up and defending the powerless. That is what Jesus preaches.
And it's exhausting for people in marginalized communities to constantly having to be fighting. They need someone to come alongside and lift them up on their behalf and be their allies and stand in solidarity.
Yes.
Not just like in trite ways, but actually joining them. And I think solidarity means that you suffer a little bit, that you suffer with the other people.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're not going to be protected from the suffering. If you jump in to help the marginalized and unjust, it's going to be difficult, and you will also experience the suffering that they're experiencing.
Absolutely. And it's hard to have a voice of authority if you're speaking against suffering that you're not willing to suffer yourself.
Or if you're speaking from so far outside of it.
But of course, people who are listening to these voices will do anything they can to dismiss the voices. Oh, it's a woman. Oh, it's this person. Oh, it's that person. We shouldn't listen to them. They shouldn't be teaching us. And that's wrong. And this is what is going on here is the crowd is looking at the surface and not the content. Oh, he's from Galilee. Oh, he doesn't have an education. And so this is why Jesus says later on, we'll get to it, don't judge by appearances, judge by right judgment. Because if they had used right judgment here, they would know, as Jesus says, that his teaching comes from God. I think the other thing that we need to point out from this little passage here is just his statement of Jesus. If you want to know God, you must do God's will. That is really interesting. He says, if you're willing to do God's will, you would know my teaching comes from God. So, for example, If we are truly seeking to and trying to love our neighbor as Jesus taught and modeled, we will grow in knowledge and wisdom and be much more adept both in loving our neighbor, but also recognizing whether the teaching and actions of others about loving their neighbor are in line with God's heart if we start to do that, if we go out and try it. If we wait until we understand everything about loving our neighbor before we actually start loving our neighbor, we'll never start.
That's very much what we talked about before with the religious leaders. They intellectually figured something out and outlined exactly how to follow God's will, right? Like if we intellectually study how to love people and create steps on what we should and shouldn't do, you still haven't loved anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even for people who, if we're exploring Jesus and we want to learn more about him, if we are trying to understand who he is, but we're not willing to live by his teaching or go and do his teaching, then we're going to struggle to really see who Jesus is and understand him. If we say, I have to understand everything first and then I will act, we're not going to act. Perhaps we can just flip that around and say, I will act and trust that then I will understand. I will start loving my neighbor and then I trust I'll understand why it is this way and how to do it.
Knowledge of Jesus and Christianity or whatever, like it's not useful unless it leads you to action. It's how we live out Jesus's teaching and what we actually do rather than what we know that makes us a success in God's kingdom.
Absolutely. I totally agree. When we appear before Jesus, he's not going to give us a theology test.
Yeah, we're not going to have an exam.
Yeah.
Like, how much do you know about me and Christianity?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
it's going to be,
We're going
how
to
did you treat?
Yes. We're going to look at our lives.
Checkout clerk.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is also good for us because it gives us some discernment around how do we, when we're receiving teaching, listening to teachers, how can we discern, how can we filter whether this teaching comes from God or not? And Jesus's words here give us that insight. He talks about who's getting the glory from this teaching and what's the fruit of this teaching. So if the teacher is promoting themselves, or if the church is promoting itself, or if the message benefits some and not all of humanity, or if there is this desire for power, wealth, and control, then something is wrong.
It's just another zinger. I thought it was such a zinger. I read that and thought that was such a zinger when you did that you said that in the daily podcast as well. And I really think these are just such good, like a good framework of questions to help us evaluate the teaching, because all of us are consuming information and teaching about Jesus from your church, from your podcast. Yes, even this podcast. And yes, even like the books you're reading, the influencers you're following, or whoever else is teaching you about Christianity. So we have to ask, what is the fruit of this? Is this leading to love in action? Or does it not look like love at all? Does it look like hatred? Does Jesus get the glory? Does somebody else get this? Does this teaching for the flourishing of all humans or just ones that follow a certain like line? Is there any power or control desires showing up in this teaching? We all have to be really careful and think critically about what we're consuming.
Absolutely. Because God-centered teaching will lead to the flourishing of all humanity, not just a segment of humanity.
Right.
I think we should move on. And because here he ends with this question, didn't Moses give you the law, yet none of you keep the law? Why do you want to kill me? And the crowd ignores that more important first part of why not keeping the law, and they focus on the second part of why do you want to kill me? So,
as is the habit of all these humans that we've encountered so far, Jesus gives them like solid truth and they focus on something that doesn't really matter.
Yeah. So why don't we read that? Verses 20 to 24.
The crowd answered, "You have a demon. Who wants to kill you?" Jesus replied, "I did one work and you were all astonished. Because Moses gave you the commandment about circumcision, although it wasn't Moses but the patriarchs, you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man can be circumcised on the Sabbath without breaking Moses' law, why are you angry with me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? Don't judge according to appearances, judge with right judgment."
Okay, let's start with the crowd saying, you have a demon. This was a cultural way of calling someone crazy. When they said, oh, you have a demon, they're saying, you're crazy, you're deluded, you're a madman.
You're nuts.
And mentioned that We're going to see this happening more frequently throughout the rest of John's gospel as his opponents feel more and more backed into a corner. They start to resort to petty insults. And I'm just going to say this and move on. This is a very good measure of character in a person in power. When they are challenged, do they resort to name calling? And like you said, Jamie, Jesus uses the example of circumcision to call out the leaders on their willingness to bend the rules for their benefit and for their beliefs, but insisting others follow them. How could they address one part of the body, but indict Jesus for addressing the entire body?
Yeah.
He causes a whole body to flourish.
That's why they wanted to kill him, because he healed the man on the Sabbath.
Yes.
And he's saying, I healed this whole man's body, but you can circumcise someone and that's okay, but I can't heal a whole man's body and soul, and that's evil.
Yeah, exactly right. They didn't care. They didn't want to see people flourish. They just wanted people to follow the rules, their interpretation of scripture. They were more concerned about the appearance of things than the actual heart of the matter. And this is one reason Jesus tells us not to judge according to appearances, but to judge with right judgment. These religious leaders, looked at the appearance. They looked at the outward things of Jesus, like education, geography, and all that. And they deemed him unfit for Messiah when they could not have been farther from the truth. But those who looked with the eyes of faith beneath the appearances, they saw Jesus for who he truly was, just like Peter did. You are the Holy One of God. And it makes me wonder how many times we dismiss people based on outward things. We look at the surface and say, that's from God. But when you get beneath the surface, it's clearly not. It clearly leads not to flourishing. And then we have other things where we say, oh, that couldn't be God. But when we get beneath the surface, it's, oh, this is actually leading people to flourishing.
Like, for instance, somebody speaking up against the system. It will be like, this is ungodly, get out of here. But actually, it's very close to the heart of God.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, making hasty judgments based on appearance can lead us to judging something as good that is actually bad, or judging something as bad that is actually good. Righteous judgment cannot happen if we judge by appearances on the surface.
But I think, though, that's hard because human beings, our culture, that's what our culture teaches us to do, is you base somebody's worthiness on how they look or how wealthy they are. It's the physical stuff that we judge somebody by. And even in Samuel, like way back to Samuel, when he was looking for the next king, and he went by all these really big, handsome, strong men. And then God said, humans look at appearances, but the Lord looks at the heart of people.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
It is the common human thing to judge by appearances.
Yeah, and I actually think because it's so common and we're all immersed in it, until we wake up to that fact, we're always going to do it. So it's something that you have to actually and intentionally resist and train yourself not to do. This is not the way of Jesus, to be judging people like this, but it's not an easy thing to just naturally change that because everybody else does it.
You're exactly right. All right, I think we should move on to the final question of the crowd that we're going to look at today. So maybe, Jamie, you can read verses 25 to 30.
Some people from Jerusalem said, "Isn't he the one they want to kill? Here he is speaking in public, yet they aren't saying anything to him. Could it be that our leaders actually think he's the Christ? We know where he's from, but when the Christ comes, no one will know where he's from." While Jesus was teaching in the temple, he exclaimed, "You know me and you know where I'm from. I haven't come on my own. The one who sent me is true and you don't know him. I know him because I'm from him and he sent me." So they wanted to seize Jesus, but they couldn't because his time hadn't yet come. And I'm guessing that's the different time.
Yes, that's the Greek word hora.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And this passage summarizes a lot of what we've already talked about today. It's another example of judging by appearances and coming to the wrong conclusion. They think they know Jesus, they know where he's from, but they neither know him nor know where he comes from. Both geographically, they don't realize that he comes from Bethlehem. And of course, spiritually, they don't realize he comes from above.
That's so weird. Like, they're like, you don't have the lineage of the Messiah. Did they not do their research?
Well, exactly right. The religious leaders could have figured this out on their own if they wanted to, because they kept detailed records of family history, and they could have learned that Jesus was in fact born in Bethlehem. And so, like we said, this quote from N.T. Wright during the meditation, the real issue isn't their ignorance about Jesus's background, but their ignorance about God himself. They don't know God. Therefore, they can't associate the Jesus they are seeing as the one sent from God. And that's so true for today. If we don't know God, then we are going to misjudge many of his teachings and actions in the world as not from God, or judge many of the teachings and actions that are not from God as from God. We just talked about that. We have to look at Jesus. We have to be immersed in Jesus to know if the actions and message of others emulate his love and character.
And it goes back to what we said last week. If somebody is spoon feeding you their version of Christianity, that's not great. You have to be immersed in this yourself. You got to know Jesus for yourself. You got to read the Gospels yourself and study it yourself so that you yourself have an understanding of what Jesus wants. And then you'll be able to recognize when something's going off. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of everybody teaching you.
I completely agree. And I would even suggest to say, if we can immerse ourselves in Jesus, in the Gospels, and get to know his character, get to know him, then we can look at things going on in the world, and anything from personal decisions to political policies, and say, can I picture Jesus doing that or teaching that or mandating that?
Again, it's the fruit. If the fruit's bad, the teaching's not right.
Exactly right. So we've just talked about how Jesus is this polarizing presence. The very first words that we're going to look at next week is in verse 31. Many from that crowd believed in Jesus. And Jesus now has some words for the believers in the crowd, which we're going to look at next week. Want me to move on to our takeaways and close out? So what were your takeaways from this passage?
3 takeaways. I'll just reiterate what we said. The first one, we must personally be steeped in the life of Jesus in order to understand how to live and to be able to identify teachings that do not align with Christ. If you don't do that for yourself, like I just said, you are at the mercy of whatever teaching you're receiving. Number 2, we have to redefine success. In God's kingdom, success is the person who is the last, who is the servant, the person who loves Jesus and loves others. And who are the truly successful in your world? How can you make growing in love the most important priority in your life? And then finally, I just think of the story of Esther. For such a time as this, if you don't speak out, who will?
I like those. For me, my takeaway is all this week. I mean, you mentioned things were a little spicy at times in the meditations, but I felt like Jesus' words were such an indictment against power, both the grasping for power by the church and the character of those in power. And so a takeaway, what is my attitude toward power? Like, am I benefiting from an unjust system? And if so, am I willing to speak out against it? Or am I just going to stay quiet because it's helping me out here? Also, the other takeaway is the importance of humility and love, which really is the greatest power of them all. Even though it doesn't look like power to the world, to walk in humility and to walk in love is the greatest power available to us.
Yeah. And again, we're not saying we've mastered this. We're saying we are very much on the journey along with you. And we're all just, each day we can be a little bit better in this area with the help of the Holy Spirit. Okay, so that leads us to the end of this session. Listener, if there's anything that caught your attention, either from all the podcasts from the previous week or from this episode or from the examine yesterday, go ahead to our social media dated on May 16th, 2025, and comment under the week 19 recap post. And also, if you are finding that you are benefiting from this podcast in any way, or it's helping you grow or turn towards Jesus or anything like that, would you consider sending us a donation?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jamie. That's really important. Listener, if you are interested in supporting The Wild Way, you can go to our website, thewildway.ca, and click Support Us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you have any other comments you'd like to leave, email us at podcast@thewildway.ca.
Or shoot us a message on Instagram at Go the Wild Way. We got a message this week, actually, from Jill, who said she's really enjoying the moments of silence that you've been adding in a few weeks ago. Those moments of silence that you're adding at the start of each meditation has been really soul feeding for her. So Thanks, Jill, for letting us know.
Thank you. That was a big risk because the last thing you want to do on a podcast is
dead silence.
Have dead silence.
And listening to it, it's a little weird because you're like, is this thing on still? Do I got to check? And then all of a sudden there you are again. It was good though.
Yeah, but it really does focus your thoughts for sure.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone for sticking with us to the end. We're so grateful for you, more than you are aware. See you next week.
Bye-bye. A Slow Journey Through John is made possible by our donors who generously support the creation of Wild's spiritual formation content and the creation of Wild Way parishes. If you would like to help financially support the Wild Way with a tax-deductible donation, please visit thewildway.ca and click Support Us.